I stood in the kitchen shadows, gripping a glass of ice water while my blood ran hot. My father and sister were whispering about exactly how to humiliate me at the upcoming party, treating me like the family failure. They had no clue that for 7 years, I had quietly built a massive empire. The deed to this very house was already under my holding company's name. This year, the joke would not be on me. My name is Nicole Vaughn. I am 39 years old, single, and in the eyes of the people sitting in the dining room 10 feet away, a spectacular failure. I parked my rented sedan, a beige model with a scratching sound in the transmission, at the end of the driveway. The rest of the town was a postcard of small-town American Christmas spirit. Every lawn on Elm Street was choked with inflatable snowmen and strings of twinkling lights that likely cost a fortune in electricity. But as I stared up at the colonial house where I had spent the first 18 years of my life, I felt nothing but a familiar, creeping chill that had nothing to do with the December wind. I checked my reflection in the rearview mirror. I had worn a simple gray sweater and dark trousers, clothes that screamed mediocrity. I looked tired. I let my shoulders slump intentionally. It was part of the uniform. When you are the family punching bag, you have to dress the part. If I looked too happy, too successful, or too well-rested, it disrupted their ecosystem. They needed me to be the mess so they could feel clean. Taking a deep breath, I stepped out of the car and walked toward the front door. I did not knock. I just walked in, bracing myself for the performance. The dining room was warm, smelling of roast beef and rosemary, but the atmosphere was as brittle as dry ice. My mother had set the table with her grandmother's silver, the good pieces that only came out when she wanted to impress someone. The table was a masterpiece of holiday decor, with a centerpiece of holly and red candles burning low. But the seating arrangement told the real story. My father sat at the head of the table, looking robust and flushed with wine. My mother sat to his right, and my younger sister, Savannah, sat to his left. They formed a tight, impenetrable triangle of warmth and conversation. My setting was placed at the far end, slightly skewed, as if added as an afterthought. I sat down, unfolding my napkin. I noticed immediately that while everyone else had the matching bone china plates with the gold rim, my plate was from a different set. It was white, plain, and had a small chip on the edge. "You are late, Nicole," my mother said, not looking up from her slicing of the beef. "We almost started without you." "Traffic was bad coming out of the city," I said softly. "If you left earlier, traffic would not be an issue," my father said. He took a long sip of his Cabernet. "But I suppose when you do not have a real schedule to keep, time management falls by the wayside." I picked up my fork. "It is good to see you too, Dad." Savannah beamed at me. She was 34, glowing with the kind of health that comes from expensive dermatologists and zero stress. She wore a red silk dress that probably cost more than the car I had driven here. "Don't be mean, Daddy," Savannah said, her voice dripping with artificial sweetness. "Nicole is doing her best. How is the consulting business? Nikki, still finding yourself?" "It pays the bills," I lied. My voice was steady. "I have a few clients." "Clients?" my father scoffed. "You mean people who don't know any better. You are nearly 40. Nicole, at your age, I was running the regional sales division. Savannah just closed 3 deals this week. 3, high-end residential." "It is a boom market if you know how to position yourself," Savannah said, flipping her hair. "I actually just got listed in the 40 under 40 list for the county. The gala is next month." "We are so proud," my mother cooed, reaching across the table to squeeze Savannah's hand. "At least one of you is building a legacy. Nicole, have you met anyone? Or are you still determined to die alone in that cramped apartment?" "I am fine, Mom," I said, cutting a piece of meat that tasted like sawdust in my mouth. "I focus on my work." "Work," my mother laughed, a harsh, tinkling sound. "Oh, honey, we worry about you. We really do. It is embarrassing when the neighbors ask what you are doing, and I have to invent things so I do not look like a bad mother." I chewed slowly, forcing the food down past the lump in my throat. "I was a CEO. I managed assets that could buy this entire town 3 times over. I had just negotiated a merger last week, worth $400 million. But here, in this room, under the yellow light of the chandelier, I felt myself shrinking. I felt like the 12-year-old girl who was told she was in the way. "Excuse me," I said, standing up abruptly. My chair scraped loudly against the hardwood floor. "I need some water." "The pitcher is right there," Savannah pointed out. "I need ice," I said. "I will be right back." I walked out of the dining room, my legs feeling heavy. I pushed through the swinging door into the kitchen. It was empty and quiet. I leaned against the granite counter, gripping the edge until my knuckles turned white. "You are an adult," I told myself. "You are powerful. They are small." But the conditioning of a lifetime is a heavy chain to break. I poured a glass of water from the fridge dispenser, letting the cold liquid numb my hand. I needed a moment to reassemble my mask. I needed to be the Nicole they expected. Sad, defeated, quiet. Not the Nicole who could hostilely take over a corporation before breakfast. I took a sip and turned to go back. As I approached the service hallway that connected the kitchen to the dining room, I heard voices. They were low, but in the acoustic quirk of this house, the sound carried perfectly through the ventilation vent above the pantry. It was my father and Savannah. They must have stepped away from the table while I was in the kitchen. "Are you sure she will come to the party?" Savannah asked. "It won't work if she's not there." "She will come," my father said. His voice was thick with amusement. "She is desperate for our approval. If we tell her it is a family requirement, she will show up like a trained dog." "I have the slideshow ready," Savannah giggled. "I found that picture of her from 10th grade, the one with the acne and the terrible haircut, and the one where she tripped at graduation. I am going to frame it as a life achievement retrospective." I froze. The glass in my hand felt like it was freezing to my skin. "Just make sure you sell it as a joke," my father warned. "We want everyone to laugh. But if she cries, we need to be able to say she's just being oversensitive. We need to knock her down a peg. She was looking a little too arrogant walking in here tonight." "Don't worry," Savannah said. "I ordered a trophy, a plastic one. The participant award. For the woman who tries hard but never actually wins anything. The guests will die laughing. It is the highlight of the night." My stomach turned. They were not just mean. They were calculated. They were planning a public execution of my dignity for entertainment. "Good," my father said. Then, the sound of his voice changed. It became lower, more urgent. "Now, about the other matter. Did you talk to the agent?" "I did," Savannah whispered. "But Daddy, are you sure? If we leverage the house again, and the market dips—" "Quiet," my father hissed. I heard a click. It was a mechanical sound I did not recognize immediately. I moved a fraction of an inch, peering through the crack in the slightly ajar door. My father was standing by the antique liquor cabinet in the hallway. He had pushed the heavy oak cabinet aside, revealing a section of the wall I had stared at for years. But now, a panel was removed, revealing a wall safe. I had never seen that safe in my life. My father's fingers flew over the keypad. The light turned green. He pulled it open. He didn't take anything out, nor did he put anything in. He just stared into the dark metal box with a look of profound, terrified desperation. It wasn't the look of a man who was angry at his failure of a daughter. It was the look of a man who was drowning. "We need the cash flow. Savannah," he muttered, closing the safe with a heavy thud. "The investors are asking questions. If this party goes well, if we secure the funding from the Miller account, we are safe. If not, we lose everything. The house, the cars, your business." "Okay," Savannah said, her voice shaking slightly. "Okay, we will make sure the party is perfect, and making Nicole the comic relief will distract them. It always relaxes people to have a common punching bag." "Exactly," my father said. "Let's go back before she wonders where we are." They moved away. I stood rooted to the spot, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. They were broke. They were frauds. And they were going to sacrifice me on the altar of their social standing to distract from their own rot. I turned to retreat into the kitchen, to give them time to sit down, and I nearly screamed. Mrs. Doyle, the housekeeper who had worked for us since I was 10, was standing right behind me. She was holding a tray of desserts. Her gray hair was pulled back in a severe bun, and her uniform was spotless. She looked at me. Then she looked at the hallway where my father had just been. Mrs. Doyle knew. She had seen me listening. I opened my mouth to beg her not to say anything, but she stopped me with a raised hand. Her face, usually a mask of professional indifference, softened. Her eyes were sharp, intelligent, and filled with a sudden, fierce solidarity. She looked at the door where my family sat, then back to me, slowly, deliberately. She nodded. It was not a bow. It was a signal. I saw them too. I know who they are. Do what you have to do. Then, without a word, she turned and walked silently toward the dining room, carrying the tray of cakes to the people who treated her like furniture. I exhaled a breath I didn't know I was holding. The fear was gone. In its place was something cold and hard, like a diamond. I walked back into the dining room. I sat down in my mismatched chair. I picked up my fork. "Is everything all right, Nicole?" my mother asked, eyeing me critically. "You look pale." "I am fine, Mother," I said. I cut a piece of the roast beef. I looked at Savannah. She was smiling at me, the predator looking at the wounded gazelle. "So," Savannah said, leaning forward, "you are coming to the Christmas Eve party, right? You absolutely cannot be late. I have a huge surprise for you. It is going to be unforgettable." I looked her dead in the eyes. For a second, I let the mask slip. Just a fraction. I let her see the steel underneath. "Oh, I will be there," I said. My voice was calm, level, and devoid of the hesitation they were used to. "And you are right, Savannah." "About what?" she asked, blinking. "The surprise," I said, offering a thin, razor-sharp smile. "You have no idea what is coming." The dinner finished in a blur. I made my excuses, citing a headache and a long drive back to the city. My father did not walk me to the door. My mother merely waved from her chair. Savannah was too busy texting to look up. I walked out into the biting December air. The Christmas lights on the lawn seemed to mock me, blinking in a frantic rhythm. I got into my rental car and slammed the door, shutting out the world. My hands were shaking as I put the key in the ignition. Not from fear, from adrenaline, the kind of adrenaline you get right before you jump out of a plane. I pulled out of the driveway, watching the house disappear in the rearview mirror. That house, my house, they didn't know it, but the bank they were paying their mortgage to had been acquired by a subsidiary of Northline Capital 6 months ago, and Northline Capital belonged to me. I drove until I reached the edge of town, where the darkness of the highway began. I pulled over to the shoulder. I reached into my glove compartment and pulled out a second phone. It was a sleek black device that I never used in front of them. I dialed a number I knew by heart. It rang once. "Vaughn Residence," a deep professional voice answered. It was Eli, my head of operations. I looked out at the snowy road, my eyes dry and burning. "Activate the plan," I said. "Start tonight." The highway stretched out before me, a ribbon of asphalt cutting through the black pine forests. The hum of the tires on the road was a hypnotic rhythm, dragging my mind backward, away from the icy competence of the woman I had become and back to the girl I used to be, the girl who had slowly, methodically, been erased. I could pinpoint the exact year I became invisible. It was the year Savannah was born. Before that, the family photo albums were populated with pictures of me, learning to walk, holding a balloon, smiling with 2 missing front teeth. But after 1995, I became a ghost in my own history. If you looked at the framed photos lining the staircase of that colonial house, you would see Savannah blowing out candles, Savannah riding a pony, Savannah holding a diploma. I was there, but only technically. I was the blurred elbow at the edge of the frame. I was the shadow in the background. I was the negative space that defined her brightness. It started with the vacations. When I was 12 and Savannah was 7, My parents planned a trip to a resort in Florida. I remembered packing my small suitcase, folding my shirts with the precision that would later define my business strategy. 2 days before the flight, my father sat me down at the kitchen table. He did not look at me. He looked at his coffee. He told me that the suite they booked only had one extra bed. He said that tickets had become expensive. He said that I was big enough to stay with Aunt Joanne, that I would only be bored watching Savannah play in the kiddie pool. He framed it as a logical decision, a matter of logistics. I stayed behind. I spent that week staring at the rain against my aunt's window, while my parents sent postcards of Savannah meeting a dolphin. That was the first lesson. Resources were finite, and I was the budget cut. By the time I reached high school, I had learned to stop asking to be included. I poured that energy into the only thing I could control, which was my performance. I became a machine of academic excellence. I brought home report cards with straight A's, thinking that excellence would buy their affection. It did not. When I showed my mother a 98% on a calculus final, she would glance at it while stirring soup and say, "Well, you have always been book smart. Nicole, that is just normal for you." But when Savannah brought home a C+ on a history project that she had pasted together with glitter and factual errors, my father would beam. He would tape it to the refrigerator and say, "Look at that creativity. She really has a spark, doesn't she?" Mediocrity in her was treated as genius. Perfection in me was treated as a baseline requirement, unworthy of applause. The sharpest shard of memory, the one that still lodged near my heart, happened when I was 16. I had entered the State Youth Art Exhibition. I had spent 4 months working on a charcoal realism piece, staying up until 3 in the morning, shading the contours of an old man's hands until they looked like they could grip the paper. I won first prize. It was the biggest achievement of my young life. The award ceremony was on a Tuesday night. I told my parents the date 3 weeks in advance. I wrote it on the calendar in red ink. On the morning of the ceremony, my mother told me they could not come. Savannah had a tap dance recital at her dance school. It was not a competition. It was not a finale. It was a Tuesday practice recital where she would be one of 20 girls shuffling in the back row. "She gets nervous if we are not there. Nicole," my mother had said, adjusting her pearl earring. "You are strong. You don't need us to hold your hand to pick up a piece of paper." I accepted the award alone. I stood on a brightly lit stage, shaking the hand of the mayor, looking out into a sea of proud parents flashing cameras. I found the empty seat I had saved for them. It remained empty for the entire night. Later, they took us out to dinner to celebrate. We went to Savannah's favorite pizza place. My father raised a glass of soda and made a toast to Savannah for being brave and getting up on that stage. My first place trophy was sitting in a plastic bag under the table, resting against my foot. No one asked to see it. No one asked what I had drawn. The silence around my victory was so loud it was deafening. When we got home, I took the certificate out of the bag and placed it on the counter. A final, desperate bid for acknowledgement. My father walked by, loosened his tie, and glanced at it. "Art is a nice hobby, Nicole," he said, his voice flat and devoid of warmth. "But let's be realistic. It does not pay the mortgage. Focus on something practical. Stop dreaming." That was the night the artist in me began to die, and the strategist began to breathe. The only person who saw me, truly saw me, was my grandmother, Rose. She lived in the guest cottage behind our house until she passed away when I was 17. She was a woman of few words, but she observed everything with eyes that missed nothing. She saw the inequality. She saw the neglect. One afternoon, she found me crying behind the garden shed after my mother had told me I was too intense to be around Savannah's friends. Grandma Rose took my hand. Her skin was like paper, but her grip was iron. "Nicole," she said, her voice raspy but firm. "Listen to me. The world will try to make you small. Your father will try to make you small because your bigness scares him. Do not let them." She tapped her temple. "Real power is not the noise you make. It is what you keep in the bank and what you keep in your head. It is the wealth of silence. You build it quietly. You pile it up. brick by brick, where no one can see it, and one day, when they least expect it, the wall you built will be the only thing standing. I clung to those words like a lifeline, but the final severing happened 6 months later. I had been secretly preparing a portfolio to apply for a scholarship at a prestigious design institute in New York. It was my escape plan. I had gathered my best sketches, my paintings, everything I had poured my soul into. I left the portfolio on the dining table one evening, foolishly hoping that if they saw the professional quality of the work, they might finally respect me. I woke up to the sound of tearing paper. I ran downstairs to find my father standing by the trash can. He was not shouting. He was not throwing things. He was calmly, methodically ripping my sketches in half. "I found this distraction," he said, dropping the halves of a portrait into the bin. "We talked about this. You are going to community college for business administration. I am not letting you throw your life away on this garbage. It is fanciful. It is useless." My mother stood by the sink, washing a dish. She did not turn around. Her shoulders were hunched, and I knew she was listening. But she chose the safety of her silence over the defense of her daughter. There was no physical blow. He never hit me. He didn't have to. The sound of the thick art paper tearing was violent enough. It sounded like bones breaking. I did not cry. I did not scream. Something inside me simply clicked off. The part of me that craved their love. The part that was a needy child. Withered and died right there on the kitchen floor. I looked at my father, then at my mother's back. I realized then that begging would never work. Excellence would never work. The only thing they respected, the only language they spoke, was leverage. I went back to my room and sat on the edge of my bed. I made a vow to the empty room. I swore I would never ask them for a single dollar, a single favor, or a single kind word ever again. "The money in my future account," I whispered to the dark, "will be my only answer to them." On my 18th birthday, I did not wait for a party that I knew they would not throw. I packed a single, battered suitcase. I took the $300 I had saved from secret babysitting jobs. I walked out the front door without saying goodbye. I had no car. I walked 2 miles to the bus station. I sat on the hard plastic bench, clutching my ticket. I had nothing but the clothes on my back, a terrifying amount of intelligence, and the ghost of my grandmother's advice. I was not leaving to run away. I was leaving to build the arsenal I would need to come back. And as the bus pulled away, leaving the town and the house and the pain behind, I did not look back. I looked forward, into the silence where I would build my empire. The transition from the suffocating atmosphere of my childhood home to my actual reality began the moment I drove the rented beige sedan into the underground parking structure of Avalon Crest. This building was a spire of glass and steel piercing the night skyline of the city, a place where privacy was the most expensive amenity on the lease. I parked the rental in a guest spot, far away from the lineup of vehicles that actually belonged to me. I took the elevator up. It was a private lift, keyed biometrically to my fingerprint. As the numbers climbed higher, shedding the weight of the street level, I felt the tension in my shoulders begin to unknot. When the doors slid open on the 45th floor, I stepped into a world that George and Linda Vaughn could not even conceive of, let alone afford. My penthouse was a sanctuary of silence and minimalism. The floors were polished concrete, warmed by radiant heating. The walls were glass, offering a panoramic view of the city lights that looked like scattered diamonds on black velvet. There was no clutter here, no mismatched china, no dusty holiday decorations, no pretension. There was only space. I kicked off my shoes and walked across the room to the eastern wall. To the naked eye, it appeared to be a seamless panel of dark walnut wood. I pressed a specific knot in the wood grain, and a section of the wall hissed open, revealing a hidden workspace. This was the nerve center of my life. It looked less like a home office and more like a tactical command center. 3 monitors hummed to life, displaying real-time market data from Tokyo and London. I sat in the leather chair, finally allowing myself to be Nicole Vaughn, the CEO. My family believed I was a struggling consultant, scraping by on freelance gigs. It was a carefully cultivated lie. The truth was that I had founded my first company, a medical data analytics firm, when I was 24. I had developed an algorithm that predicted patient intake surges for emergency rooms. 3 years later, I sold it to a healthcare conglomerate for $42 million. I did not buy a yacht. I did not go on a shopping spree in Paris. I did what Grandma Rose would have done. I reinvested. I split the capital into 3 distinct entities. First was the medical software company, which I still chaired. Second was Vaughn and Meridian Strategies, a boutique consulting firm that specialized in corporate restructuring. Essentially, I was the person companies called when they needed to cut the rot out of their organizations. My family thought consulting meant I was unemployed. In reality, my hourly rate was higher than my father's monthly pension. And third, the most important piece of the puzzle was Northline Capital. It was a private equity firm I established to acquire distressed assets, real estate, and bad debt. It was a ghost company, operating through layers of shell corporations and legal trusts. My name did not appear on the front door, but my signature moved the money. This was the irony that kept me warm at night. I drove a rental car to Thanksgiving. I wore clothes from discount racks when I visited them. I let them pay for my coffee with a pitying look. I maintained the camouflage of mediocrity because it made them feel safe. And when people feel safe, they are careless. I swiveled my chair to the large steel safe bolted into the concrete floor of the hidden room. I spun the dial and pulled the heavy door open. Inside, neatly organized in color-coded folders, was the ammunition I had been gathering for 6 months. I pulled out the thickest file. It was labeled simply, The Vaughn Estate. I laid the papers out on the desk. They were not just documents. They were an autopsy of my parents' financial life. To the outside world, George and Linda lived the American dream. They had the big colonial house, the country club membership, and the new cars. But the paper trail told a story of reckless stupidity and vanity. I picked up the title search for the house I grew up in. The one they were so proud of, was mortgaged. Not once, not twice, but 3 times. They had taken out a home equity line of credit 5 years ago, and another high-interest loan just last year. They owned almost zero equity in the property. Effectively, the bank owned the house, and they were just squatting in it while paying interest. And the bank they owed? After a series of mergers and acquisitions in the secondary mortgage market, the debt was now held by a subsidiary of Northline Capital. I ran my finger down the column of figures. It was staggering. They were bleeding money. They had refinanced the house to pay for credit card debt, only to run the cards back up again. But the most infuriating expenses were the ones labeled SV Investment. Savannah. I opened the subfile on my sister. My parents had convinced themselves that Savannah was a real estate prodigy. The truth was far uglier. The startup capital for her brokerage firm had come from a loan against the house. The lease on her luxury SUV was co-signed by my father. The business trips she took to Cabo and Aspen were paid for with the home equity line of credit. They were literally cannibalizing the roof over their heads to fund Savannah's delusions of grandeur. But the real weapon was in the second stack of papers. This was the result of a forensic accounting audit I had commissioned. I picked up a copy of a loan application my father had submitted 2 years ago. I compared it to his actual tax returns from the same year. The numbers did not match. On the application, he had inflated his income by nearly 200%. He had listed assets he did not own. He had claimed consulting fees that did not exist. It was bank fraud. It was a felony. If I were a stranger, I would have handed this file to a federal prosecutor, and my father would be spending his retirement in a minimum security prison. He had lied to lenders, lied to the IRS, and lied to his family. I looked at a specific transaction from last December, a withdrawal of $15,000 from the equity line. The memo said, "Home repairs." I cross-referenced it with Savannah's social media from that same week. There were no repairs. There was, however, a photo of Savannah wearing a brand-new designer watch and holding a glass of champagne in a VIP lounge in Miami. The bitterness rose in my throat, acidic and hot. They had risked their home, their security, and their freedom, all to keep Savannah looking successful. Meanwhile, they lectured me about being practical. They looked down on me for driving a sedan that didn't start properly in the cold, while they were driving stolen luxury paid for with fraud. I leaned back in my chair, staring at the ceiling. The silence of the penthouse felt different now. It was the silence of a judge's chambers before the gavel falls. They were living on a landmine. They were months away from default. The interest rates on their variable loans were about to reset, and the payments would jump to a level they could not possibly afford on a pension and Savannah's sporadic commissions. They were walking around with their noses in the air, planning parties to humiliate me, completely unaware that the ground beneath them had already crumbled. They were tenants in a house they thought they were kings of. And the landlord was me. I picked up my phone and opened the calculator app. I punched in the total amount of their debt, added the penalties for late payments, and factored in the immediate recall of the loans due to the fraudulent application. The number on the screen was catastrophic. It was a life-ruining amount of money. I had the power to detonate it. I could foreclose on the house tomorrow. I could report the fraud. I could leave them homeless and facing legal action before the new year began. It would be easy. It would be justified. But that was too simple. That was just destruction. I wanted something more precise. I wanted them to understand exactly who they had underestimated. I wanted the realization to dawn on them slowly, terrifyingly, while they were surrounded by the very people they tried to impress. I closed the file folder with a soft slap against the desk. I placed it back in the safe, right next to the deed transfer documents I had prepared earlier that week. I stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the city. Somewhere out there, in the suburbs, my father was probably sleeping soundly, dreaming of his big speech at the Christmas party. My sister was probably dreaming of the applause she would get when she presented her cruel little slideshow. Let them sleep, I thought. Let them dream. I turned away from the window and walked out of the office, sealing the wall behind me. The hidden room vanished, leaving only the sleek, impenetrable surface of the penthouse. I was not just the victim anymore. I was the architect of the coming storm. I checked the time. It was late, but I had one more call to make to my legal team to ensure the trap was set for Christmas Eve. I picked up the phone. "Proceed with the acquisition of the final lien," I said to the voicemail of my attorney, "and draft the disclosure agreement. I want it ready for signature on the 24th. I hung up and walked to the bedroom. For the first time in years, I was looking forward to Christmas. The next morning, the city was gray and sharp, matching the mood inside my chest. I sat in my car outside a glass-fronted building in the financial district, typing a brief email on my phone. Subject: Execution of asset transfer. To Margaret Lewis. Message: I am downstairs. Let's finish this. Margaret Lewis was more than just my attorney. For the past 15 years, she had been the mother figure Linda Vaughn never knew how to be. Margaret was 60 years old, with hair the color of steel wool and a mind that was twice as abrasive against lies. She had guided me through the sale of my first company, taught me how to structure my wealth to be invisible, and held my hand during the lonely holidays when I refused to go home. I took the elevator to the 30th floor. The receptionist at Lewis & Associates nodded to me, pressing a button under her desk to unlock the heavy frosted glass doors. Margaret was waiting for me in her corner office. The view here was different from my penthouse. It looked out over the old courthouse and the federal buildings, a reminder of the laws that governed us all. "Nicole," she said, standing up to grip my hands. Her grip was warm, unlike the limp handshakes I received at family gatherings. "Are you sure you want to do this? Once we sign these, there is no going back to being just their daughter. You become their creditor." "I was never just their daughter, Margaret," I said, sitting down in the leather chair opposite her desk. "I was their scapegoat. Now, I am just changing the nature of the transaction." Margaret sighed, adjusting her glasses. She opened a thick leather binder on her desk. Inside, the paperwork was meticulously tabbed and highlighted. "Everything is in order," she said, her voice shifting into professional gear. The bank was more than happy to offload the portfolio, They considered it high-risk, toxic debt. We have acquired the primary mortgage, the secondary home equity line of credit, and the unsecured personal loans your father took out last year. The purchasing entity is, as requested, Vaughn Harbor Holdings, LLC. She slid the binder toward me. However, Margaret said, her tone dropping an octave, we found something else during the final due diligence this morning, something that wasn't in the initial credit report. I paused, my pen hovering over the signature line. What is it? Margaret pulled a separate sheet of paper from a red folder. We ran a deeper forensic audit on the collateral assets. Your father didn't just inflate his income. He has been moving money from a dormant account. It looks like the old Community Development Fund. I felt a cold spike in my stomach. The fund he managed when he was the treasurer for the neighborhood association? That was 20 years ago. That money was supposed to be for maintaining the parks and the community center. Supposed to be, Margaret corrected. It seems about $40,000 of it was never spent. It sat in a low-interest account that he had signatory authority over. 3 months ago, he transferred the entire balance into his personal checking account to cover the arrears on the mortgage. I stared at the paper. That is embezzlement. It is theft, Margaret said bluntly. And because he used wire transfers to move it, it is wire fraud. If this file lands on a district attorney's desk, your father is not just looking at bankruptcy, he is looking at federal prison time. I leaned back, feeling the weight of the revelation. My father, the man who preached about integrity and hard work while tearing up my drawings, was a common thief. He had stolen from his neighbors to buy Savannah a lifestyle she didn't earn. He is desperate, I said quietly. He is dangerous, Margaret countered. To himself and to anyone financially linked to him. Nicole, listen to me. By buying this debt, you are effectively buying the evidence of his crime. You are the only thing standing between him and a cell. This is a double-edged sword. You can save him, or you can bury him. Are you ready to hold that kind of power over your own family? I looked at the stack of documents. Vaughn Harbor Holdings, LLC. It sounded like a faceless corporate entity, a cold monolith. But it was me. It was the girl they left behind on vacations. It was the teenager whose art they destroyed. I am not doing this to bury them. Margaret, I said, my voice steady. I am doing this to make them stop. They have bullied me for 39 years because they thought I was weak. They need to understand that the only reason they are still standing is because I am holding them up. I leaned forward and began to sign. Nicole Vaughn. Director. Nicole Vaughn. CEO. Page after page, with every signature, the ownership of my childhood home, the cars in the driveway, and the very ground my parents walked on transferred from a nameless bank into my hands. The scratching of the pen was the only sound in the room, loud and rhythmic. When I signed the final document, Margaret closed the binder with a definitive snap. It is done, she said. We will file the transfer with the county clerk this afternoon. Technically, as of 5 o'clock today, you own the paper on their house. Thank you, Margaret, I said, standing up. Be careful, Nicole, she warned, walking me to the door. When people like your father get cornered, they do not apologize, they bite. I left the office and stepped back into the cold rush of the city. I checked my personal phone for the first time in hours. The screen lit up with a barrage of notifications. 12 missed calls from Dad, 4 missed calls from Mom, a string of text messages that escalated from annoyed to furious. Where the hell did you go last night? Your mother is crying. You ruined the dinner. You are selfish. You always have been. If you don't show up early on Christmas Eve to help Savannah set up, don't bother coming at all. I'm going to teach you some respect, young lady. You are going to apologize to your sister in front of everyone. I read the threats with a detachment that surprised me. Yesterday, these texts would have made my hands shake. Today, they looked like the tantrums of a child who didn't realize his allowance had just been cut off. I walked to my car, got in, and sat in the silence of the driver's seat. I typed a single reply to my father. Have you seen the box I left in the living room? I hit send. Then I turned off the phone. I did not need to be there to know what was happening. I had orchestrated the moment perfectly. I closed my eyes, and I could see the scene unfolding in the house on Elm Street as clearly as if I were standing in the corner of the room. In the living room of the colonial house, the silence would be heavy. My father would be reading the text message, his face purple with the rage he had been nursing all morning. He would look around, confused, until his eyes landed on the coffee table. There, sitting in plain sight, was a flat, rectangular package wrapped in brown paper. I had placed it there the night before, slipping it out of my large tote bag, while everyone was distracted by Savannah's stories about her imaginary real estate deals. "What box?" he would bark, stomping over to the table. My mother would hover nervously behind him, twisting her hands in her apron. Savannah would probably be on the sofa, scrolling through her phone, barely paying attention. "It is just some trash she left behind," Savannah would say. "Probably old books or something boring." My father would rip the paper off. He was never a man of patience. He would tear the wrapping away, expecting an insult, or perhaps a pathetic peace offering of cheap chocolates. Instead, the paper would fall away to reveal a frame. It was not a cheap frame from a department store. It was museum-quality mahogany, heavy and polished, with UV protective glass. Inside the frame was a drawing. It was a charcoal sketch of an old pair of hands, Grandma Rose's hands, holding a small, fragile bird. The shading was exquisite, the details hyper-realistic, but running through the center of the drawing, crossing the wrists of the figure, was a jagged, undeniable scar. It was the tear. 22 years ago, my father had ripped this drawing in half before throwing it in the kitchen trash. He thought it was gone forever. He didn't know that I had climbed out of bed at 2 a.m, dug the pieces out of the bin, and taped them together on the back with trembling fingers. I had kept that drawing for 2 decades. I had taken it to one of the best art restorers in the country. I told the restorer not to hide the tear, but to stabilize it. I wanted the scar to be visible. I wanted the violence to be part of the art. In the living room, the air would be sucked out of the space. My father would stare at the image, the memory hitting him like a physical blow. He would remember the sound of the paper tearing. He would remember the way I looked at him, not with tears, but with that dead, cold switch flipping off in my eyes. "This," he would stammer. "I threw this away." My mother would step closer, her hand flying to her mouth. She would recognize it instantly. She had watched him tear it up. She had stood there and done nothing. "Turn it over," Savannah might say, her curiosity finally piqued by their silence. My father would flip the heavy frame over. On the back, sealed under a protective clear sheet, was the original inscription I had written when I was 17 years old, intended for my portfolio. "To Grandma Rose, because you taught me that what is broken can be built again in silence. Nicole, 1998. The handwriting was unmistakably mine, but it was the handwriting of a child who still had hope. My mother would start to cry, not the manipulative tears she used to get her way, but the terrified tears of someone who realizes they have been watched. They would realize that I had not forgotten. I had not moved on. I had preserved the evidence of their cruelty, framed it in gold, and placed it in the center of their home. Savannah would look from the picture to our father, a creeping unease settling in her stomach. Why would she send this? It is just an old drawing. But my father would know. He would look at the tear in the paper, and then he would think about the text message I had just sent. He would think about the lesson he threatened to teach me. The drawing was a message. It said, "I remember what you did. I still have the pieces, and unlike the 17-year-old girl you crushed, the woman I am now can afford to frame your mistakes and hang them on the wall." I opened my eyes in the car. The visualization was so strong my heart was beating fast. That drawing was the first shot across the bow. It was my way of telling them that the narrative had changed. They thought they were dealing with the daughter who sought their approval. They were wrong. They were dealing with a historian who had kept the receipts. I started the engine. The meeting with Margaret had given me the weapon. The gift in the living room had announced the war. I had 3 weeks until Christmas Eve. I had the mortgage. I had the evidence of fraud. I had the element of surprise. I drove back toward my office at Vaughn and Meridian Strategies. I had a transition plan to finalize. If my father thought a torn drawing was disturbing, he was going to be absolutely terrified by what I brought to the party. For the first time in my life, I wasn't driving away from my family to escape. I was merely circling back to close the deal. I walked through the double-glass doors of Vaughn and Meridian Strategies at 8:15 in the morning. The lobby was a cavern of polished white marble and silence, broken only by the rhythmic clicking of my heels. The logo behind the reception desk was understated, just the initials V and M in brushed steel. But everyone in this city who mattered knew what those letters stood for. They stood for discretion, for crisis management, and for the kind of ruthless efficiency that saved billion-dollar companies from their own mistakes. "Good morning, Ms. Vaughn," the receptionist said, standing up immediately as I approached. "I have your coffee waiting in your office, and Eli is already inside." "Thank you, Sarah," I said, offering a nod. It was a stark, almost jarring contrast. 12 hours ago, I had been the family disappointment, the woman who supposedly couldn't hold down a real job. Here, I was the sun around which this entire solar system revolved. If my father could see the way these people looked at me, with a mixture of genuine respect and a healthy dose of fear, his brain would likely short-circuit. I entered my corner office. Eli, my chief of operations, and the only person who knew the full extent of my family history, was standing by the window. He turned as I closed the door, his face grim. He didn't waste time with pleasantries. "The transfer is recorded," Eli said. "As of 9 o'clock this morning, Vaughn Harbor Holdings is officially the primary lien holder on the property at 42 Elm Street. You are no longer just their daughter. Nicole, you are their landlord, their bank, and their executioner." I walked over to my desk and sat down, resting my hands on the cool leather surface. "Did the notification go out?" "Not yet," Eli said. "I put a hold on the automated letter. I figured you would want to deliver the news personally." "Good call," I said. "What about the deeper audit? You said there was something else." Eli pulled a chair up to my desk and opened a file. Unlike the legal papers Margaret had shown me, this file was old. It contained photocopies of bank statements from 20 years ago, minutes from neighborhood association meetings, and a series of emails recovered from a defunct server. "I had the forensic team dig into the origins of your father's consulting income from the early 2000s, Eli said. "We found a discrepancy, a big one." He slid a spreadsheet toward me. "Do you remember the Elm Street Community Improvement Fund?" he asked. "The one your father was treasurer for?" "I remember," I said, a cold memory surfacing. "It was supposed to pay for the new playground and the repaving of the cul-de-sacs. He used to make speeches about it at the block parties. He talked about civic duty." "Well," Eli said, pointing to a highlighted row, "it turns out his definition of civic duty was very flexible. Over a period of 3 years, roughly $55,000 was siphoned out of that fund." I stared at the number. $55,000. In the grand scheme of the deals I close now, it was a rounding error. But 20 years ago, for a suburban community fund, it was a fortune. "How did he do it?" I asked. "Vendor fraud," Eli explained. "He created invoices for a landscaping company that did not exist. He approved the payments himself, and the checks were deposited into a personal account under his name. He used the money to pay for the addition to the house, the sunroom, the one he likes to sit in and read his paper." I felt a wave of nausea, followed immediately by a surge of white-hot anger. I remembered that sunroom. I remembered him sitting there, lecturing me about responsibility, about how I needed to work harder, about how I was a burden on the family finances. He had built his sanctuary with stolen money. He had looked his neighbors in the eye, accepted their casseroles and their praise, all while stealing from their children's playground fund to upgrade his own lifestyle. "He was never caught?" I asked. "It was close," Eli said. "There was an internal audit proposed in 2004. Suddenly, the records went missing. A clerical error. The inquiry was dropped because the board members were his friends. It was swept under the rug. But we found the rug, I said softly. We did, Eli confirmed. And the statute of limitations for the theft itself has passed. However, since he listed those consulting fees on his recent loan applications as legitimate historical income to verify his credit worthiness, it becomes relevant again. It proves a pattern of financial fraud. If we hand this to the bank fraud investigators, it paints a picture of a career criminal, not just a desperate retiree. I leaned back, closing my eyes for a second. My father wasn't just mean. He was corrupt. The moral high ground he had stood on for decades was built on a sinkhole. There is more, Eli said, his voice hesitant for the first time. It is about Savannah. I opened my eyes. What about her? Eli flipped to the next section of the file. We looked into the corporate structure of her real estate brokerage. She is not just operating out of the house. She has commingled her business assets with your parents' personal debt. Her name is on the secondary mortgage as a co-borrower. I looked at the documents. Savannah's signature, loopy and immature, was right next to my father's. She signed as a guarantor, Eli said. She used the equity in the house to secure a line of credit for her business operations, marketing, staging, her leased luxury car. It is all tied to the house. So if I foreclose on the house, I started. You bankrupt her company, Eli finished. The moment the house goes into foreclosure, her business line of credit will be called in immediately. She does not have the liquidity to pay it back. She will lose her business license. She will lose the car. Her reputation as a self-made success story will be exposed as a fraud funded by her parents' debt. I stood up and walked to the window, looking down at the traffic crawling 40 stories below. I had always resented Savannah. I resented how easy her life was, how she was celebrated for mediocrity while I was punished for excellence. But looking at this, I realized something more complex. She was a monster of their making, but she was also their victim. They had used her, and she had used them, in a toxic symbiosis. If I pulled the pin on this grenade, I wouldn't just be hurting my father. I would be obliterating my sister's entire existence. She doesn't know, I said, watching a helicopter cut across the sky. She thinks the money is endless. She has no idea she signed her own death warrant. It makes the decision harder, Eli observed quietly. Or it makes it necessary, I said, turning back to him. Set up a meeting with legal and the CFO. I need a menu of options. I want to know exactly how much pressure we can apply without blowing the whole thing up. I need a calibration. 10 minutes later, I was in the boardroom. The long glass table was occupied by my CFO, Marcus, and my lead corporate counsel, Sarah. They treated the destruction of the Vaughn family finances with the same dispassionate professionalism they would apply to a hostile takeover of a rival firm. We have 3 tiers of engagement, Sarah said, projecting a slide onto the wall. Tier 1, she said, pointing to the screen. The warning. We approach them privately. We reveal the debt ownership and the evidence of fraud. We force them to sign a strict repayment plan and a behavior modification agreement. Essentially, we put them on probation. You control the house, but they keep living there as long as they obey your rules. Tier 2, Marcus added, the squeeze. We call in the loans immediately. We seize the assets. We leave them with nothing but their pensions. We do not press criminal charges, but we destroy their credit and their social standing. Savannah loses her business. And Tier 3? I asked, though I already knew. The nuclear option, Sarah said, her face grim. We file the fraud charges. We hand the embezzlement evidence to the state. We foreclose publicly. Your father likely goes to prison, or at least spends the rest of his life in court battles he cannot afford. The family name becomes toxic. I looked at the options. Tier 3 was what the angry child inside me wanted. It was the revenge for the torn drawings, the forgotten birthdays, the years of neglect. But the woman I was now, the CEO, the strategist, knew that total destruction often left a mess that was impossible to clean up. Prepare the paperwork for Tier 1 and Tier 2, I said. I want to walk into that Christmas party with both guns loaded. I will decide which trigger to pull when I see how they behave. Understood, Sarah said, gathering her papers. We will have the drafts ready by noon. As the meeting broke up and the executives filed out, my phone buzzed on the table. It was a video call request. I frowned. The ID on the screen said Joanne Miller. My Aunt Joanne, my mother's younger sister. I hadn't seen her in 6 years. She had stopped coming to holidays a decade ago. My father always said she was unstable and jealous of their success. I accepted the call. Joanne's face filled the screen. She looked older than I remembered, her hair gray and cut short, but her eyes were clear and sharp, so much like Grandma Rose's that I felt a pang in my chest. She was sitting in a sunlit kitchen that looked modest but cozy. "Nicole," she said, her voice breathless. "Thank God you answered. I wasn't sure if you kept this number." "Hello, Aunt Joanne," I said, my voice softening. "It has been a long time." "Too long," she said. She glanced over her shoulder, as if checking to see if anyone was listening. "Listen, I don't have much time. I heard through the grapevine that you are going to the Christmas party this year, that things are tense." "You could say that," I replied dryly. "There are things you don't know," Joanne said, her voice dropping to a whisper. "Things about your mother and about the will." "The will?" I asked. "Grandma Rose's will?" "No," Joanne said. "Your mother's will. The one she wrote 10 years ago, before your father made her change it, and the papers she gave me for safekeeping." I stiffened. "What papers?" "She was scared." "Nicole," Joanne said, her eyes filling with tears. "She has been scared for 20 years. She knew what he was doing with the money. She knew about the fraud. She tried to leave. Once. Did you know that?" I shook my head, stunned. "No, I thought she was just compliant." "She was trapped," Joanne said fiercely. "He threatened to take you girls away. He threatened to ruin her, so she stayed, but she documented everything. She gave me a box. She said, 'If Nicole ever fights back, give her this. It is the only weapon I can give her.'" My heart hammered against my ribs. I had thought my mother was a villain in this story, a silent accomplice. But Joanne was painting a different picture, a picture of a hostage who had smuggled out intelligence. "I need to see you," I said. "Where are you?" "I am in Cedar Rapids," she said. "About 2 hours from you." "I can be there tomorrow morning," I said. "Come alone," Joanne instructed. "And Nicole, do not tell a soul. If your father knows I have these papers, he will burn that house down before he lets you see them." "I will be there," I promised. "Tomorrow," she said. "We have to finish what your grandmother started." The screen went black. I sat alone in the boardroom, the silence ringing in my ears. I thought I had the full picture. I thought I had all the leverage, but I was wrong. The rabbit hole went deeper. My mother wasn't just a bystander. She was a silent partner in my rebellion, waiting 10 years for me to be strong enough to receive the signal. I stood up, grabbing my phone. The plan for the party had just changed. I wasn't just going there to collect a debt. I was going there to exonerate a prisoner. "Eli," I called out as I walked back into the hallway. "Cancel my morning meetings tomorrow. I am going on a road trip." I drove 2 hours west to Cedar Rapids, leaving the steel and glass skyline of my city behind for the flat, gray expanse of the interstate. The world seemed to lose its color the further I got from my penthouse, fading into the muted browns and whites of winter cornfields. I pulled into the parking lot of a diner called the Rusty Spoon. It was the kind of place that smelled permanently of bacon grease and filtered coffee, a place where people came to hide in plain sight. Aunt Joanne was sitting in a booth at the back, far away from the windows. She looked small. I had not seen her in years, and time had eroded the sharp edges I remembered. She was wearing a thick wool coat that she had not taken off, as if she needed to be ready to run at a moment's notice. On the table in front of her sat a battered leather satchel. "Nicole," she said when I approached. Her voice was tight. She did not stand up to hug me. She just gestured to the vinyl seat across from her. "You look expensive." "I have had a good run," I said, sliding into the booth. Thank you for meeting me, Aunt Joanne. I almost didn't come, she admitted, her hands wrapping around a ceramic mug. Your father has a long reach and a long memory. If he knew I was talking to you, the phone calls would start again, the threats. He can't hurt you anymore, I said, my voice low and hard. I promise you that. Joanne studied my face, looking for the girl she used to know, and finding a stranger. She reached down and unzipped the satchel. She pulled out a thick, yellow manila envelope. The seal was unbroken, the wax cracked with age. On the front, in handwriting that made my breath hitch, was my name. Nicole. It was my mother's handwriting, not the shaky scrawl I had seen on birthday cards in recent years, but the elegant, looping script she had when I was a child, before the stress tremors set in. She gave this to me 10 years ago, Joanne whispered. She came to my house in the middle of the night. She was shaking. She made me swear on our mother's grave that I would keep it hidden until you were strong enough to use it, or until she was dead, whichever came first. I took the envelope. The paper felt heavy, like it was holding something dense and volatile. Open it, Joanne said. I broke the seal. Inside, there were several folded sheets of lined paper and a stack of photocopies. I unfolded the letter first. My dearest Nicole, it began. If you are reading this, it means I failed you. I know you hate me. I see it in your eyes every time you come home, and I deserve it. You think I chose him over you. You think I stood by and watched him break your spirit because I didn't care. But the truth is, I was broken long before you were born. I felt a sting in my eyes and blinked it away. Your father is not just a hard man. Nicole, he is a jailer. When Savannah was born, he made it clear that if I ever tried to leave him, if I ever tried to take you girls away, he would destroy me. He controls every cent. He monitors the phone bills. He checks the mileage on the car. I stayed because I was terrified that if I left, he would win custody. I stayed to be a buffer, even though I know I was a terrible one. I looked up at Joanne. She was afraid of him? He told her she was incompetent, Joanne said quietly. He told her she was mentally unstable and that no judge would ever give her the children. He gaslit her for 30 years. Nicole, she wasn't an accomplice. She was a hostage. I looked back at the letter. I know about the community fund. I saw the bank statements he thought he destroyed. I dug them out of the shredder bin before he emptied it. I taped them back together, just like you did with your drawings. I made copies. I gave them to Joanne because I knew that one day you might need a weapon. He thinks you are weak, Nicole, but I know you are the strongest of us all. Use this if you have to. Save yourself. I shifted the papers. Under the letter were the photocopies my assistant Eli had only guessed at. Here was the smoking gun, transfers, dates, amounts. My mother had been acting as a silent spy in her own home, gathering evidence while pretending to be the submissive housewife. There is more, Joanne said. She pulled a second document from the bag. Do you remember the conversation about the will, back when your grandmother died? I remember, I said. Dad said Grandma left everything to the estate, which meant him. That was a lie, Joanne said. But I am talking about your mother's will. Look at this. She slid a document across the table. It was a draft of a last will and testament, dated 12 years ago. I, Linda Vaughn, being of sound mind, leave my assets to be divided equally between my daughters, Nicole and Savannah. I read further down. To my daughter Nicole, I leave the diaries of my mother, Rose, her emerald brooch, and the title to the 2 acres of undeveloped land in the county that I inherited before my marriage. I froze. Mom had land? And Grandma's diaries? I asked for those diaries. I begged for them. Dad told me they were lost in a basement flood. They weren't lost, Joanne said, her voice trembling with anger. He sold the land 2 weeks after he forced your mother to sign a new will. He used the money to pay off a gambling debt he incurred in Atlantic City. And the diaries? He locked them in his safe because he knew you wanted them. He kept them as trophies, to punish you. She handed me a second version of the will, the one currently on file. It was short, brutal, and left everything to my husband, George Vaughn, effectively cutting me out completely. He stood over her while she signed it, Joanne said. I was there as a witness. He told her that if she didn't sign it, he would stop paying for Savannah's college tuition. He used your sister as leverage against your mother, and he used your mother to hurt you. I felt a sensation I hadn't expected. It wasn't just anger anymore. It was a profound, aching grief. All these years, I had looked at my mother with contempt, seeing a weak woman who preferred her husband's approval to her daughter's well-being. But she had been fighting a war of attrition in silence. She had tried to save pieces of my heritage, the diaries, the land, only to be crushed. And finally, Joanne said, reaching into the very bottom of the bag, she pulled out a small bank-issued envelope. It was thick with cash. What is this? I asked. Groceries, Joanne said, a sad smile touching her lips. For 5 years, your mother would overcharge the grocery budget by $20 here, $10 there. She would get cash back at the register. She hid it in a coffee tin in the laundry room. She wanted to give it to you when you graduated, to help you start your life. But your father found the tin. My stomach turned. He took it? He took most of it, Joanne said. He screamed at her for hours. He called her a thief, but she had already given me this much. It is $4,320. It is not much. Nicole, I know you probably make this in a day now, but it was everything she had. I took the envelope. I held it in my hands. $4,000. To the Nicole Vaughn who ran Vaughn Harbor Holdings. This was petty cash. It was the price of a handbag. But to Linda Vaughn, the housewife who was terrified of her husband, this was a fortune. This was 5 years of courage. $20 at a time. It was an escape fund she never got to use, so she tried to save it for me. I realized then that my mother loved me. She loved me with a desperate, impotent love that had been suffocated by fear. She isn't the villain, I whispered. No, Joanne said firmly. She is the casualty, and if you go into that house on Christmas Eve and burn everything to the ground, you burn her too. She won't survive a scandal. Nicole, your father will blame her. He will say she knew about the fraud. He will throw her to the wolves to save himself. I looked at the pile of evidence on the table. I had the mortgage. I had the proof of the current fraud. And now, I had the proof of the past embezzlement and the coerced will. I had come here looking for ammunition to destroy my father. I had found it. But I had also found something that complicated everything. I had found my mother's humanity. You have to choose, Joanne said, leaning forward. You have the power of a god over them right now. You can crush them, or you can save the one person who tried, in her own weak way, to save you. But you cannot do both. If you expose him publicly, you destroy her. If you want to save her, you have to be surgical. I put the papers back into the yellow envelope. I tucked the cash into my purse next to my black American Express card. The contrast between the two sources of wealth, one born of ruthless capitalism, the other of maternal sacrifice, was jarring. I won't let her go down with him, I said. I am going to get her out, and I am going to get Grandma's diaries back. Be careful, Joanne warned again. When you corner a rat, he doesn't fight fair. I am not a rat catcher anymore. Aunt Joanne, I said. Sliding out of the booth, I felt a cold, calm resolve settling over me. I am the exterminator, and I decide what gets saved from the building before the fumigation starts. I walked out of the diner into the biting wind. The gray sky didn't look depressing anymore. It looked like a clean slate. I had 3 layers of leverage now. 1. The debt, the financial noose around their necks. 2. The legal fraud, the threat of prison. 3. The moral high ground, the secret history of my mother's abuse and her attempt to protect me. My father thought he was walking into a party to embarrass his daughter. He had no idea that he was walking into a courtroom where the judge, jury, and executioner were all the same person, and she was armed with 20 years of evidence. I got into my car and threw the bag onto the passenger seat. I picked up my phone and dialed Eli. Change of plans for the agreement drafting, I said as I pulled onto the highway. We need a new clause, a protection clause. I need a structure that separates my mother's liability from my father's. And Eli? Add a specific demand for the return of personal property. I want a line item for the Rose Vaughn journals. If he claims they are lost, the deal is off. Understood, Eli said. You sound different. I am different, I said. I just realized I am not fighting for revenge anymore. I am fighting a rescue mission. I treated the Christmas Eve party not as a family reunion, but as a hostile corporate merger. It required logistics, intelligence, and a contingency plan for every possible variable. 3 days before the event, I sat in the conference room of a private security firm called Gray Scale. Across from me sat a man named Miller, a former intelligence officer who now ran protection for high-net-worth individuals who preferred to stay out of the headlines. I do not want thugs in sunglasses, I told him, sliding a floor plan of the Silver Pines Lodge across the table. I want ghosts. Miller studied the layout. We can provide 3 operatives. One will be your driver. The other 2 will infiltrate the venue. We can place one as a server and one as a guest. We have a cover identity ready for a +1 if you need it. The guest will be my escort. I decided. I need someone who looks the part. Expensive suit, quiet confidence. His job is to deter the casual insults. The server needs to be invisible. And the objective? Miller asked. Surveillance, I said. I want audio and video of everything. Specifically, I need a direct feed of the main event hall. My sister is planning a presentation. I want it recorded in high definition. If things go sideways, I want the unedited footage uploaded directly to my company's encrypted server. No one in that room touches the data but me. Consider it done, Miller said. We will have eyes on you from the moment you leave your penthouse until you are back inside. Next came the armor. I went to L'Eclat, a boutique that required an appointment just to look at the window display. I worked with a stylist named Julian, a man who understood that clothes were not just fabric, they were a language. I need something that says, I own the building, not, I am renting a room, I told him. We bypassed the flashy sequins and the loud prints. I settled on a gown in a deep, dark wine color, a shade of Bordeaux so rich it looked almost black in low light. It was sleeveless, with a high neck and a back that plunged dangerously low. The cut was architectural, skimming the body without clinging, made of a heavy silk crepe that moved like liquid. It was the kind of dress that whispered money rather than shouting it. But the dress was the reveal. Over it, I chose a coat that was intentionally underwhelming. It was a simple, gray wool trench coat, slightly bulky. It was the kind of coat the old Nicole would wear. The plan was to walk in looking like the failure they expected. Let them get comfortable, and then remove the layer of mediocrity to reveal the threat underneath. It is theatrical, Julian noted as he pinned the hem. It is psychological warfare, I corrected. The next stop was Margaret's office to pick up the football, the nickname we had given to the leather portfolio containing the legal documents. It was slim, black, and lethal. Margaret handed it to me with a solemn expression. Everything is tabbed. Tab A is the proof of debt assignment. Tab B is the forensic accounting of the fraud and the embezzlement evidence from the community fund. Tab C is the copy of your mother's letter and the original will. I ran my thumb over the leather. And the acquisition documents? Signed and notarized, she said. You are officially the owner of the note. You can legally initiate foreclosure proceedings the moment the clock strikes midnight if you choose to. I took the portfolio. In my head, I ran through the 3 scenarios I had mapped out on my whiteboard at home. Scenario A was the de-escalation. This was the one where a miracle happened. My father sees the framed drawing I sent, realizes the gravity of his mistake, and pulls the plug on the humiliation. He apologizes. In this version, I leave the portfolio closed. I simply inform them of the debt purchase privately, enforce a payment plan, and protect my mother without bloodshed. Scenario B was the skirmish. They proceed with the humiliation, but it is minor, verbal jabs, a few bad jokes. In this version, I reveal the debt ownership publicly, but keep the fraud and the embezzlement secret. I shame them financially, but spare them the criminal exposure. Scenario C was the scorched earth. This was the scenario where they doubled down, where they tried to destroy me. In this version, I open every tab. I expose the debt, the fraud, the stolen community funds, and the coerced will. I burn the house down with them inside it. I hoped for scenario A. I prepared for scenario C. 2 days before the party, I went to see Dr. Evans, my therapist. I sat in her beige office, staring at a generic watercolor painting on the wall. "You are vibrating," Dr. Evans observed. "You look like you are about to run a marathon." "I am about to finish a marathon," I said. "I have been running it for 20 years. Remember our goal, Nicole," she said gently. "Closure is not the same as destruction. If you go in there looking to draw blood, you will just stay in the cycle. You become him. The goal is to cut the cord, to assert your reality and walk away." "I know," I said. "I don't want to hurt them. I just want them to stop. But if they don't stop, I need to know that I'm allowed to defend myself." "Defense is healthy," she said, "but make sure you are defending the woman you are, not avenging the child you were. The child is gone. The woman has choices." I left her office feeling centered. I wasn't going there to scream. I was going there to negotiate the terms of my surrender, or theirs. The final piece of the puzzle fell into place 24 hours before the party. I was reviewing quarterly reports in my home office when my personal cell phone rang. It was Mrs. Doyle. I answered immediately. "Mrs. Doyle, is everything all right?" "It is Savannah," Mrs. Doyle said. Her voice was hushed, and I could hear the clattering of pans in the background. She was hiding in the pantry again. I saw her laptop. She left it open on the kitchen island while she went to get her nails done. "What did you see?" I asked. "Slides," Mrs. Doyle whispered. "She has made a presentation. She scanned all those old photos of you, the ones from when you had braces, the ones where you looked awkward, but she has edited them. Nicole, she put captions on them. The family charity case. Most likely to borrow money, and there is a video clip of you tripping at your graduation. She is planning to project it on the big screen at the lodge. She calls it the roast." My hand tightened on the phone. A roast. They were going to project my teenage awkwardness onto a 10-foot screen in front of the town's elite, laughing at me while sipping champagne bought with money they stole from my inheritance. "Thank you, Mrs. Doyle," I said, my voice icy calm. "You have done enough. Delete this call from your history." I hung up and immediately dialed Miller at the security firm. "New objective," I said when he answered. "The venue is Silver Pines Lodge. I need your tech guy to gain access to their AV system." "That is a secure system," Miller said. "It might take some time." "You have 6 hours," I said. "I don't need you to shut it down. I need you to clone the access. I need a remote override. If Savannah Vaughn hits play on a laptop, I want to be able to cut her feed and replace it with my own. Can you do it?" There was a pause on the other end. "We will have a man in the sound booth. He will patch a wireless receiver into the HDMI switch. You will have control from your phone." "Good," I said. "And Miller, tell your team to be ready for scenario C." On Christmas Eve, the city was dusted with fresh snow. I stood in front of the floor-to-ceiling mirror in my bedroom, the wine-red dress pooled around my feet, the silk cool against my skin. I looked at the woman in the reflection. Her hair was swept back in a severe, elegant chignon. Her makeup was flawless, highlighting the sharp angles of her face. She looked powerful. She looked dangerous. I picked up the gray wool coat and put it on, buttoning it all the way to the chin. Instantly, the CEO vanished. The powerful woman disappeared under the shapeless fabric. I looked like Nicole the failure again. It was the perfect camouflage. I walked over to the desk and picked up the black leather portfolio. It felt heavy in my hand, heavier than $4,000 in cash, heavier than a gold bar. It held the weight of 3 lives inside it. I walked to the elevator. My phone buzzed in my pocket. It was the app connected to the security team. "Status, green. AV. Override, active. Escort is waiting in the lobby. I stepped into the elevator and watched the doors slide shut. I wasn't angry anymore. I wasn't sad. I was simply inevitable. Tomorrow, I said to the empty car. Either they learn exactly who they have been mistreating for 20 years, or I lock the door on this family and never look back. The elevator began its descent, taking me down to the street where the car was waiting to take me to the last family dinner I would ever have to endure as a victim. The tires of the black town car crunched over the packed snow of the Silver Pines Lodge driveway, a sound like bones snapping under heavy boots. Beside me sat James, the operative from the security firm. He was dressed in a charcoal suit that cost more than my father's car, wearing a Patek Philippe watch that was a convincing replica, and carrying himself with the bored, predator-like ease of old money. "We are live," James said, his voice low. He tapped his earpiece once. "Audio is clear. My partner is at the bar. The tech is in the booth. You are the package." "Let's go," I said. James stepped out first, opening my door with a deference that immediately drew eyes. I stepped out into the cold night air, wrapping my gray wool coat tightly around me. It was the armor of the old Nicole, shapeless, dull, protective. We walked up the stone steps to the massive double doors of the lodge. The air inside smelled of pine, cinnamon, and expensive perfume. The room was already crowded with the town's elite, local politicians, business owners, and the country club set. My parents had spent their lives trying to impress. A hush rippled through the entryway as we stepped in. It wasn't because of me, not yet. It was because of James. He was a stranger in a town where everyone knew everyone, and he looked like he owned a skyscraper. "Coat, madame?" the check-in attendant asked. "Yes," I said. I unbuttoned the gray wool trench coat. I let it slide off my shoulders. The attendant took it, revealing the wine-red silk gown beneath. The silence in the immediate vicinity deepened. The dress was a masterpiece of tailoring. It skimmed my ribs and flared slightly at the hips, the dark red fabric absorbing the light rather than reflecting it. It exposed my back, revealing skin that was not hunched in defeat, but held straight with the posture of a woman who commands boardrooms. I saw heads turn. I saw whispers start behind champagne flutes. "Is that Nicole? My God, look at that dress. Who is she with?" I thought she was broke. I took James's arm. We moved into the room like a shark cutting through a school of tropical fish. My father was holding court near the fireplace, a glass of scotch in his hand. He looked flushed, his laugh too loud, his gestures too wide. He was playing the role of the benevolent patriarch, but I could see the sweat on his upper lip. He was terrified about money, but he was masking it with bluster. When he saw me, his smile faltered. For a split second, I saw the confusion. He had expected the frumpy, tired daughter in a cardigan. He hadn't expected this. But he recovered quickly. He was a salesman. After all. "Nicole," he boomed, spreading his arms. "You made it, and you are on time. That is a first." The jab was subtle, wrapped in a greeting. He wanted to remind everyone that I was usually unreliable. "Hello, Father," I said. I did not hug him. I stood just out of reach. "This is James. He is an associate of mine." "Associate?" my father chuckled, looking James up and down with a sneer he tried to pass off as paternal scrutiny. "Well, welcome. I hope you're not charging her by the hour. We are just a simple family here." Savannah appeared at his elbow, wearing a sparkly gold dress that looked cheap next to the deep, matte silk I was wearing. Her eyes darted over my outfit, cataloging the cost, and I saw a flicker of jealousy before she plastered on her plastic smile. "Nikki," she squealed, reaching out to touch my arm. "Wow, you really went all out. Did you rent it? There is that great place downtown that does rentals for parties." "It is custom, Savannah," I said softly. "Oh," she said, her smile twitching. She turned to the group of neighbors standing nearby. "Nicole is doing some consulting work in the city. It is very small scale, but we are so proud she is finding her footing. It must be so stressful. Living gig to gig. I hope you can just relax tonight. Sweetie, don't worry about networking. Just eat and drink. She was painting me as the charity case, the poor, struggling sister who needed a free meal. I am very relaxed, I said, my voice smooth. James, would you get me a sparkling water? Of course, James said, stepping away. He wasn't just getting water. He was positioning himself to have a clear line of sight to the stage. The party continued. I circulated, but I felt like a spy in enemy territory. Every compliment I received was backhanded. You look healthy, a neighbor said, implying I usually looked sick. I love that you are not afraid to wear something so bold, another said, implying it was too much. I smiled, I nodded, and all the while, I was tapping my clutch purse, signaling the timestamp for the audio recording every time someone said something condescending. Half an hour later, the lights in the lodge dimmed. A spotlight hit the small stage at the end of the room. My father walked up to the microphone. Ladies and gentlemen, he said, his voice amplified through the speakers. Thank you for coming. It means the world to Linda and me to have our friends and family here. Tonight is about gratitude. It is about legacy. He paused for effect. We have had a big year, he lied. Savannah's brokerage is breaking records, and even Nicole, well, Nicole managed to make it home, which is a gift in itself. We know she has a hard time keeping up with the pace of the real world, so we are just glad she is here. A few people chuckled. It was a low blow. He was publicly calling me incompetent. But tonight, my father continued, we want to have a little fun. Savannah has prepared a special presentation, a trip down memory lane. Savannah? He handed the microphone to my sister. She stepped into the light, beaming. Thanks, Daddy, she said. So, every year we do a toast, but this year, I wanted to honor my big sister. We all know Nicole has had a bumpy road. She is a dreamer, and dreamers sometimes trip. She signaled to the back of the room. The large projection screen descended from the ceiling. I call this the evolution of a struggle. Savannah giggled. The first image flashed up. It was a photo of me at 14, mid-sneeze, with frizzy hair and thick glasses. It was unflattering, but innocent enough. Then came the caption, animated in bright red letters, the before picture, still waiting for the after. The room laughed. It was a polite, nervous laughter. The next slide was a photo of me in my 20s, sitting in my first apartment, looking exhausted, surrounded by boxes. Caption, Queen of the Cardboard Castle. Then, a photo of my old car, the one that broke down constantly. Caption, 0 to 60 in. Never. The insults grew sharper. They weren't just teasing. They were attacking my stability, my career, my life. She had dug up a photo of me crying at a funeral, our grandfather's funeral, and cropped it so it just looked like I was having a breakdown. Caption, Drama Queen in Training. I stood near the back of the room, my face a mask of absolute marble. I did not blink. I did not look down. I felt James step closer to my side, his presence a silent wall of support. Are you getting this? I whispered, barely moving my lips. Every frame, James whispered back. The resolution is crystal clear. Savannah was on a roll now. She was feeding off the laughter, unaware that the laughter was changing. It was becoming uncomfortable. People were shifting in their seats. They were realizing this wasn't a tribute. It was a public shaming. And finally, Savannah announced, we have a video. A grainy clip played on the screen. It was my high school graduation. I was walking across the stage. I tripped on the hem of my gown and stumbled. It was the most humiliating moment of my adolescence. Savannah looped it, over and over. Me stumbling, me falling, me stumbling, me falling. She falls down, Savannah chirped into the mic. But hey, she stays down. Just kidding. But seriously, folks, we love her, and to commemorate her unique journey, I have a little gift. She reached behind the podium and pulled out a trophy. It was cheap gold plastic, a figure of a person shrugging. "I present the Participation Award to Nicole Vaughn," Savannah announced. "Because you tried. Come on up, Nikki. Come get your prize." The room was deadly silent now. No one was laughing. My father was grinning near the stage, oblivious to the shift in atmosphere. He looked triumphant. He thought he had broken me. I handed my glass to James. "Wait for my signal," I said. I began to walk toward the stage. The sound of my heels on the hardwood floor was the only noise in the room. Click, click, click. I did not walk like a victim. I walked like a predator entering a clearing. I kept my head high, my shoulders back. The wine-red dress flowed around me like blood in the water. I stepped up onto the stage. Savannah held out the trophy. A smirk plastered on her face. Her eyes were dancing with malice. "Don't cry," she whispered off mic as I approached. "It is just a joke." I reached out and took the trophy. It was light, hollow, and pathetic. I turned to face the audience. I saw my mother in the front row, looking down at her lap, her hands shaking. I saw the neighbors, looking embarrassed. I saw my father, his chest puffed out, waiting for me to stammer a thank you or run away in tears. I walked to the microphone stand. I adjusted it. I looked directly into the camera lens of the videographer my security team had planted in the center of the room. Then, I looked at my father. "Thank you, Savannah," I said. My voice was clear, steady, and devoid of any emotion whatsoever. It was the voice I used when I fired a corrupt executive. "And thank you, Dad," I continued, "for this demonstration." I held up the plastic trophy. "You know," I said, addressing the room but locking eyes with my father, "I was worried that I wouldn't have enough material for the legal proceedings. I was worried that people wouldn't believe me when I described the dynamic of this family." My father's smile faltered, his brow furrowed. "But this?" I gestured to the screen behind me, where the video of me falling was still paused. "This is perfect. You have just provided me with the most compelling character evidence I could have asked for." I paused. The silence in the room was suffocating. "You think this is a joke," I said, my voice dropping an octave, becoming dangerous. "But the punchline is going to be very expensive." I turned to Savannah. "I think we need to talk," I said. "In private? Now?" I didn't wait for an answer. I placed the plastic trophy gently on the podium. It made a hollow thud that echoed through the microphone. "Library," I commanded. 5 minutes. Bring Mom." I stepped off the stage and walked straight through the parting crowd toward the double doors of the lodge's library. I didn't look back. I didn't have to. I knew the air had been sucked out of the room. I knew my father's face had gone from red to pale. And I knew that for the first time in 39 years, they were terrifyingly aware that they were not the ones in charge. I closed the heavy oak doors of the library, sealing us inside. The muffled thump of the bass from the party and the murmur of confused guests faded into a dull vibration against the wood. Inside, the room was silent, smelling of old paper and the leather of the Chesterfield sofas. James, my security lead, stood outside the door with his back to us, a silent sentinel ensuring that no curious neighbor interrupted the demolition of my family. I walked to the heavy mahogany desk in the center of the room and placed the cheap plastic trophy Savannah had given me right in the center. The hollow clatter it made against the wood was the only sound. My father did not wait for me to speak. He exploded. "Who do you think you are?" he hissed, his face turning a dangerous shade of purple. He marched toward me, his finger jabbed in the air. "You ungrateful, selfish brat. We invite you here. We try to include you. And you make a scene? You threaten me in front of the mayor? In front of my investors?" "I did not threaten you, George," I said, my voice calm, dropping the title of father for the first time. "I promised you a conversation." "You are embarrassing yourself," he shouted. "If you think you can ruin my reputation with some vague threats, you are mistaken. I will tell everyone you are mentally unstable. I will tell them you are off your medication. I will ruin you. Nicole, you will be the laughingstock of this state." Savannah crossed her arms, leaning against a bookshelf. She looked annoyed rather than afraid. "Seriously, Nicole, it was a joke. You have no sense of humor. You ruined the vibe of the whole party." My mother stood near the fireplace, wringing her hands, her eyes darting between me and my father. She looked like a ghost haunting her own life. I ignored their noise. I unzipped the black leather portfolio. The sound of the zipper was sharp, like a weapon being unsheathed. "Sit down," I said. "I will not," my father began. "Sit down," I repeated, my voice cracking through the air like a whip. "Or I walk out that door, hand this file to the district attorney, and you leave this party in handcuffs." The silence that followed was absolute. My father stared at me, his mouth slightly open. He saw something in my eyes he had never seen before. He saw the end of his control, slowly, stiffly. He sat in one of the leather armchairs. Savannah rolled her eyes and perched on the arm of the sofa. My mother remained standing, trembling. I pulled out the first document. It was the assignment of note, stamped with the official seal of the county recorder. "Do you know what this is?" I asked, sliding it across the desk toward him. My father glanced at it, sneering. "Legal mumbo-jumbo, some bank transfer." "Look at the assignee," I said. He squinted. "Vaughn Harbor Holdings, LLC. I have never heard of them. Probably some shell company you dug up." "It is a holding company," I corrected, "and I am the sole director and majority shareholder." I leaned forward, placing my hands on the desk. "I bought your debt, George, all of it. The primary mortgage on this house, the home equity line of credit, the personal loans you took out last November. I own the roof over your head. I own the ground under your feet. I am not your daughter right now. I am your bank." My father laughed, but it was a dry, hollow sound. "You? You can barely pay rent on your apartment. You are lying." "Check the signature," I said, pointing to the bottom of the page. "And look at the notification letter you received 3 days ago but didn't bother to open because you thought it was junk mail." He picked up the paper. His eyes scanned the lines. He saw the loan numbers he knew by heart because they kept him awake at night. He saw the transfer amount, and he saw my signature, crisp and authoritative, next to the bank president's. The color drained from his face. It didn't happen gradually. It happened all at once, leaving him looking gray and old. This isn't possible," he stammered. "Where did you get this kind of money?" "I earned it," I said. "While you were busy telling everyone I was a failure, I was building a portfolio that could buy and sell your entire existence 3 times over." I pulled out the second sheet, the summary of arrears. "You have missed 3 mortgage payments this year," I recited, looking at the data. "You are 60 days past due on the equity line. The interest has compounded. Technically, under the terms of the note, the lender, that is me, has the right to accelerate the loan. That means I can demand the full balance, right now, tonight." "You wouldn't," he whispered. "I haven't decided yet," I said. "But let's look at the next page. This is the interesting one." I laid down the forensic accounting report. "When you applied for the refinance last year, you stated your annual income was $450,000, but according to your tax returns, which I also have, your actual income was less than $80,000. My father's hands began to shake. "That is bank fraud," I said coldly. "It is a federal crime, punishable by up to 30 years in prison and a fine of up to $1 million. I pointed to another line item. "And here we have the transfers from the old Community Development Fund, $55,000, stolen from your neighbors to build your sunroom. You listed those stolen funds as assets on your credit application. That revives the statute of limitations. It ties the old theft to the new fraud." My father looked like he was having a stroke. He slumped back in the chair, gasping for air. He looked at the door, as if expecting the police to burst in. Savannah, who had been looking bored, suddenly stood up. "Okay, so Dad is in trouble. What does this have to do with me? I have my own business. I am independent." I turned my gaze to her. It was almost pitiable how naive she was. "Oh, Savannah," I said softly, "you really didn't read the papers you signed, did you? I pulled out the cross-collateralization agreement. To get the loan for your brokerage office and your luxury car, Dad put the house up as collateral, but because his credit was maxed out, the bank required a cosigner. You signed here. I pointed to her loopy signature. You are a guarantor, I explained, and your business assets are tied to this mortgage. If I foreclose on the house, I call in your business loans too. Your accounts freeze. Your car gets repossessed. Your self-made empire dissolves instantly because it is built on Dad's debt. Savannah stared at the paper. Her mouth opened and closed, but no sound came out. The arrogance evaporated, replaced by the sheer terror of a woman realizing she was about to become exactly what she mocked: destitute. You would ruin me? She squeaked. I am not ruining you, I said. I am just calling in the tab you have been running on my inheritance for a decade. I looked back at my father. He was staring at the desk, defeated. But I wasn't done. I had one more weapon, the one that would hurt the most. I could send you to jail for the fraud, I said. I could leave you homeless for the debt. But I know what you are thinking. George, you are thinking you can spin this. You are thinking you can tell everyone I am a vindictive liar and that Mom will back you up. I reached into the portfolio and pulled out the yellow envelope. Mom won't back you up, I said. I took out the copy of the handwritten letter and the draft of the original will. I placed them gently on the desk, like placing a flower on a grave. Aunt Joanne gave me this, I said. My father's head snapped up. Joanne, that witch? She is the only reason you are not already in a cell. I cut him off. Mom wrote this 10 years ago. She detailed everything: the emotional abuse, the financial control, the way you forced her to change her will to cut me out, the way you stole the money she saved for me. I turned to my mother. She was weeping silently now, tears streaming down her face, ruining her makeup. She looked terrified, but for the first time, she wasn't looking at the floor. She was looking at me. Is this true, Mom? Savannah asked, her voice trembling. Did he make you do it? My mother took a shuddering breath. She looked at my father, then at the letter on the desk, the evidence of her own silent rebellion. Yes, my mother whispered. Linda, my father barked, trying to regain control. Shut your mouth. No, my mother said. Her voice was weak, but it was there. She stepped forward. Yes, I wrote it. I wanted Nicole to know I didn't hate her. I wanted her to know I was scared. She looked at me, her eyes pleading. I am so sorry. Nicole, I was so afraid. He told me he would take you girls away. He told me I was nothing without him. My father looked around the room. He was surrounded. His financial secrets were exposed. His legal crimes were documented. His wife had turned on him. His golden child, Savannah, was looking at him with horror, realizing he had dragged her into his mess. This is a setup, he muttered, but the fight was gone from his voice. It is a reckoning, I said. I stacked the papers back into a neat pile. I rested my hand on top of them. Here is the situation, I said, my voice hard and final. I don't want to put my mother on the street, and frankly, Savannah, watching you fail would be satisfying, but it is a waste of my time. I am not you. I don't destroy family for sport. I looked my father in the eye. So here is the deal. I have prepared a settlement agreement. It is in the car. What kind of agreement? My father asked hoarsely. First, I listed, you will transfer the deed of the house into a trust. I control the trust. Mom lives here for the rest of her life, rent-free. You can live here too, as long as she tolerates you, but you own nothing. Second, I continued, Savannah, you will restructure your business. You will remove Dad's name from all your accounts. You will pay me a monthly percentage to service the debt until it is cleared. You keep your company, but you work for me until you are solvent. And third, I said, leaning in close to my father, you will apologize, not privately, not in a letter. You are going to go back out there, get on that stage, And you are going to tell everyone that you were mistaken. You are going to tell them that I am the most successful member of this family and that you are proud of me. And then, you are never going to speak my name in public again." I paused. I shrugged. "I make one phone call to the FBI, and we talk about the $55,000 you stole from the community fund." My father looked at the papers. He looked at my mother, who had moved to stand closer to me. He looked at Savannah, who was crying into her hands. He looked at the plastic trophy on the desk, the participation award. He realized that he was the one who had lost. "Where do I sign?" he rasped. "After the speech," I said. "Now, fix your tie. George, you have a toast to make." We walked back into the main hall of the Silver Pines Lodge. The transition from the suffocating quiet of the library to the hum of the party was jarring. The guests were still murmuring, their eyes darting toward the double doors, wondering what kind of family drama had just occurred behind them. My father walked in first. He had straightened his tie and wiped the sweat from his forehead, attempting to reconstruct the mask of the jovial host. He stepped toward the stage, intending to grab the microphone and laugh off the previous 10 minutes as a bit of eccentric performance art. He was going to spin it. He was going to lie. But I was faster. I signaled James, who was standing by the sound booth. He gave a subtle nod to the tech operative. I stepped up onto the stage before my father could reach the stairs. I took the microphone from the stand. The feedback whine cut through the room, silencing the crowd instantly. "I would like to thank my family for that spirited tribute," I said. My voice was amplified, crisp and commanding. It reached every corner of the room, bouncing off the exposed timber beams. My father froze halfway up the steps. He looked at me with a mixture of panic and warning, but he could not drag me off the stage without causing a scene far worse than the one he was trying to avoid. "You all just watched a presentation about failure," I continued, looking out at the sea of faces. "You saw a teenager with bad hair. You saw a young woman struggling to fix a broken car. You saw a graduate trip on a stage. And the narrative you were given is that these moments define a person." I paused. I let the silence stretch until it was uncomfortable. "I left this town 21 years ago with nothing but a suitcase and a bus ticket. I did not have a trust fund. I did not have investors. I had $300 and a refusal to quit." I raised my hand, signaling the booth. "But since we are sharing family updates tonight," I said, "I thought I should complete the picture." Behind me, the projection screen flickered. The looping video of me falling at graduation vanished. In its place, a high-definition image appeared. It was the skyline of the city, dominated by the gleaming glass tower of the Avalon Crest building. The view zoomed into the penthouse office, then cut to the lobby of Vaughn and Meridian Strategies. The logo, a sharp silver V and M, filled the screen. Then came the photos. Not of me tripping, but of me standing at the head of a boardroom table, commanding a room of 50 executives. A photo of me signing the acquisition deal for the medical data firm. A photo of the community center in the inner city that my company had fully funded last year. There was no text mocking me. There were just facts. Nicole Vaughn, founder and CEO. Assets under management. $200 million. A gasp went through the room. It started in the front row and rippled back. The neighbors who had snickered at my rental car. The women who had pitied my plain dress. The men who had dismissed me as a consultant. They were all staring at the screen with their mouths open. "I do not show you this to brag about money," I said, my voice dropping to a serious, intimate register. "Money is just a tool. I show you this because tonight you were asked to laugh at a struggle. You were told that stumbling makes you a failure." I walked to the edge of the stage, looking down at my father, who was now standing at the bottom of the stairs, looking small and gray. "But I have learned that failure is not falling down," I said. "Real failure is the belief that you can build yourself up by tearing your own children down. Real failure is thinking that humiliation is a form of love." I didn't say his name. I didn't have to. The accusation hung in the air, heavy and undeniable. Suddenly, there was movement to my left. My mother was walking up the stairs. The room held its breath. My father reached out to grab her arm, to stop her, but she pulled away from him. It was a small motion, physically, but for Linda Vaughn, it was an earthquake. She stepped up to the microphone. She looked terrified. Her hands were shaking so hard that the microphone stand rattled, but she did not retreat. She started, her voice cracking. She cleared her throat. I want to apologize. She looked at the audience, then she turned and looked at me. I am sorry, Nicole, she said, her voice gaining a fragile strength. I watched you struggle for years, and I said nothing. I let you believe you were less than you are, and that was wrong. You are the most successful person in this room, not because of your bank account, but because you survived us. She began to weep, standing there in her expensive Christmas gown, stripped of all her pretenses. You deserve respect, she sobbed into the mic, and I am sorry it took me 30 years to give it to you. The silence in the lodge was absolute. No one moved, no one drank. The veneer of the perfect family had been shattered, not by anger, but by the raw, ugly truth of my mother's grief. My father scrambled onto the stage, forcing a laugh that sounded like dry leaves crunching. He put his arm around my mother, trying to guide her away, trying to physically block her from the audience's view. Okay, he shouted, his smile manic and terrifying. Very emotional. It is the holidays, right, folks? Everyone is a little sentimental. Just a little family joke that got out of hand. Let's get the music back on. Let's drink. He looked out at the crowd, desperate for validation. He looked for his friends, for the mayor, for the investors. But they were not smiling. Mr. Henderson, the president of the local bank, the man my father had been trying to impress for a decade, set his glass down on a passing waiter's tray. He looked at my father with a cold, disgusted expression. Then he turned to his wife, whispered something, and they walked toward the coat check. It started a chain reaction. The mayor checked his watch and signaled his security detail. The neighbors who had laughed the loudest at Savannah's slides suddenly found the floor patterns very interesting and began drifting toward the exits. The party was not ending. It was dissolving. The social capital my father had hoarded for 40 years evaporated in 3 minutes. I stepped close to my father. I leaned in so only he could hear me over the awkward jazz music that had just started playing again. Look at them. Dad, I whispered. They are not leaving because of me. They are leaving because they finally see you. He glared at me, his eyes full of hate, but also full of fear. He was a king standing in a castle made of cardboard, and it was raining. We are done here, I said. Meet me in the manager's office in 20 minutes to sign the papers. If you are late, I file the fraud charges at 9 o'clock tomorrow morning. I walked off the stage. I walked past Savannah, who was sitting on a chair in the corner, staring at the floor, realizing that her roast had just burned her own future to the ground. 20 minutes later, we were in a small, beige office behind the kitchen. The sounds of the cleaning crew sweeping up the remains of the failed party could be heard through the wall. Margaret, my lawyer, had emailed the final draft of the agreement to my phone, and James had printed it out on the portable printer he kept in the SUV. I laid the documents on the cheap laminate desk. This is the settlement, I said. My father sat opposite me. He looked 10 years older than he had at the start of the night. My mother sat beside him, holding a tissue, looking exhausted but strangely relieved. Savannah stood by the door, arms crossed, looking like a sullen teenager. The terms are simple, I explained, uncapping a pen. Section 1. Transfer of deed. The house goes into the Linda Vaughn Trust. I am the trustee. Mom, you have a life estate. You live here as long as you want. Dad, you are a guest. If you verbally abuse her, or if you try to control her finances again, I evict you. Do you understand? My father gritted his teeth. I understand. Section 2. Debt repayment, I continued, turning to Savannah. I am consolidating the loans. I am lowering the interest rate to 3%, which is a gift you do not deserve. You will pay Vaughn Harbor Holdings $2,000 a month for the next 15 years. If you miss a payment, I liquidate your brokerage." Savannah nodded, wiping a smudge of mascara from her cheek. "I will pay." "And Section 3, I said, sliding the paper to my father. "The non-disparagement and silence clause. You will never speak about my business, my personal life, or my finances to anyone, ever again. You will not claim me as a success story to your friends. As far as you are concerned, I am just your daughter who lives in the city. We are strangers who share a last name." My father picked up the pen. His hand hovered over the signature line. He looked at me one last time, looking for a crack, for a sign that I would relent. "Why?" he asked, his voice rasping. "Why didn't you just put us in jail? You could have—" "Because that would make me like you," I said. "I don't want to destroy you, Dad. I just want to make sure you never have the power to hurt me, or Mom, ever again." He signed. He pushed the paper back to me. I signed my name next to his, Nicole Vaughn. It was over. The ink dried, sealing the end of a war that had started when I was 12 years old. I stood up and gathered the papers. I handed a separate folder to my mother. "This is for you," I said. "It is a copy of the trust, and inside is a check for $4,320, plus interest." My mother looked at me, her eyes widening. She clutched the folder to her chest. "Thank you," she whispered. "Merry Christmas, Nicole." "Merry Christmas, Mom," I said. I didn't say goodbye to my father or Savannah. I simply turned and walked out of the office, down the service hallway, and out the back door into the cold night air. The snow had stopped falling. The sky was clear and filled with stars. The air was biting cold, but it felt clean. It felt new. I walked to my car. James was waiting by the driver's side door, ready to drive me back, but I shook my head. "I will drive myself," I said. "You take the team back. I need a minute." "Understood, Ms. Vaughn," James said. He handed me the keys and melted away into the darkness. I got into the car and started the engine. I sat there for a moment, letting the heat blast against my frozen hands. I looked at the lodge one last time. The lights were turning off, one by one. The party was over. The performance was done. I pulled my phone out of my purse. I had 42 text messages from guests who had been at the party, people who suddenly wanted to be my friend, people who wanted to catch up, people who wanted a job. I pressed the power button and held it down until the screen went black. I put the car in gear and pulled out onto the empty road. The tires hummed against the asphalt, singing a song of departure. I thought about revenge. People always say it is sweet, but that isn't true. Revenge is just work. It is logistics and paperwork and strategy. What I felt wasn't sweetness. It was lightness. I had cut the anchor. I wasn't the girl who was left behind on vacations anymore. I wasn't the teenager with the torn drawings. I was Nicole Vaughn, and for the first time in 39 years, I was driving home to a life that belonged entirely to me. Next year, on Christmas Eve, I would be in Paris, or Tokyo, or sitting on my own couch in silence. But I knew one thing for certain. I would never stand outside a door waiting to be let in again. I pressed the gas pedal, and the dark road swallowed me up, taking me toward the city lights that were waiting on the horizon. Thank you so much for listening to this story. Please let me know in the comments where you are listening from to connect and share your thoughts. And I invite you to subscribe to the channel Lila Revenge Stories, like the video, and support by hitting the hype button so this story can be heard by more people.